Knowledge as fuel. The rate at which man has been storing up useful knowledge about himself and the universe has been spiralling upwards for 10,000 years. The rate took a sharp upward leap with the invention of writing, but even so it remained painfully slow over centuries of time. The next great leap forwards in knowledge acquisition did not occur until the invention of movable type in the 15th century by Gutenberg and others. Prior to 1500, by the most optimistic estimates, Europe was producing books at a rate of 1,000 titles per year. This means, give or take a bit, that it would take a full century to produce a library of 100,000 titles. By 1950, 4.5 centuries later, the rate had accelerated so sharply that Europe was producing 120,000 titles a year. What once took a century now took only 10 months. By 1960, a single decade later, the rate had made another significant jump, so that a century's work could be completed in 7.5 months. And by the mid-60s, the output of books on a world scale, Europe included, approached the prodigious figure of 1,000 titles per day. One can hardly argue that every book is a net gain for the advancement of knowledge. Nevertheless, we find that the accelerative curve in book publication does in fact crudely parallel the rate at which man discovered new knowledge. For example, prior to Gutenberg, only 11 chemical elements were known. Antimony, the 12th, was discovered at about the time that he was working on his invention. It was fully 200 years since the 11th, arsenic, had been discovered. Had the same rate of discovery continued, we would by now have added only 2 or 3 additional elements to the periodic table since Gutenberg. Instead, in the 450 years after his time, some 70 additional elements were discovered. And since 1900, we've been isolating the remaining elements not at a rate of 1 every 2 centuries, but of 1 every 3 years. Furthermore, there is reason to believe that the rate is still rising sharply. Today, for example, the number of scientific journals and articles is doubling, like industrial production in the advanced countries, about every 15 years. And according to biochemist Felix Siekowitz, what has been learned in the last 3 decades about the nature of living beings, dwarfs in extent of knowledge any comparable period of scientific discovery in the history of mankind. Today, the United States government alone generates 100,000 reports each year, plus 450,000 articles, books and papers. On a worldwide basis, scientific and technical literature mounts at a rate of some 60 million pages a year. The computer burst upon the scene around 1950. With its unprecedented power for analysis and dissemination of extremely varied kinds of data in unbelievable quantities and at mind-staggering speeds, it has become a major force behind the latest acceleration in knowledge acquisition. Combined with other increasingly powerful analytic tools for observing the invisible universe around us, it has raised the rate of knowledge acquisition to dumbfounding speeds. Francis Bacon told us that knowledge is power. This can now be translated into contemporary terms. In our social setting, knowledge is change, and accelerating knowledge acquisition, fueling the great engine of technology, means accelerating change.